I never thought a single email could change the entire trajectory of my life. It arrived at 3:17 a.m. when I was half asleep on my couch in a studio apartment in Portland, Oregon. The subject line read, "Night operations role, urgent hire." I would have ignored it had the salary not caught my eye. $60 an hour for what they described as passive security monitoring in a low-traffic research facility. No patrols, no reports, just eyes on the monitors. My name is Andrew McCullen. I had just lost my job at a shipping warehouse 2 weeks prior, and my savings were bleeding dry. I clicked the email, half expecting a scam, but the domain seemed legit. I Googled the company, TerraView Analytics, and found a minimalist website with corporate language about behavioral cognition and pattern tracking. There were no reviews, no LinkedIn employee profiles, just a photo of their main facility in rural Washington. Desperation blurred my caution. I replied to the email with a brief resume and was surprised to receive a response exactly 9 minutes later. The message instructed me to be at their facility in Oysterville by 8 p.m. that night. They would cover transportation. An unmarked van would arrive at my address by 5 p.m. sharp. Something about the message felt mechanical, too immediate, too synchronized. I hesitated, reread it 3 times, then agreed. At 4:59 p.m. the van arrived. A man in a gray uniform stood silently by the passenger door. No greetings. He opened the door and gestured for me to enter. The drive took just under 3 hours. Not a word was exchanged. The facility appeared out of nowhere as we turned off the main road. It was a massive gray structure with no signs, surrounded by dense forest. The air felt heavier there. I was escorted inside and taken through a series of empty hallways, with polished white floors that reflected the ceiling lights like a mirror. There were no windows. The silence felt engineered. I was brought into a room labeled Command B. Inside, a long desk faced a wall of 10 monitors. A woman with short black hair and a pale expression greeted me. She introduced herself as Mara Simmons, onboarding director. Her words were soft but quick, like she had rehearsed them 1,000 times. She handed me a black binder with a silver TerraView emblem. Inside were 10 pages of instructions. I was told to read them thoroughly before the shift began at 9. The final page had a clause that made my stomach twist. It read, "Under no circumstances the employee to interfere with or investigate anomalies observed on Monitor 7. Mara left the room. I was alone. I flipped to Monitor 7. It was currently off. At 9, the monitors activated. Most showed empty corridors and mechanical labs. Nothing moved. The sound was muted. I tried to calm myself by reading through the binder again. Page 5 had something new I had not noticed earlier. It was handwritten in red ink between the printed text. It said, "Do not trust the man who arrives at midnight. He is not part of the facility." That was when Monitor 7 flickered on. Monitor 7 showed a corridor, unlike the others. The lights were dimmer. The floor was tiled in black instead of white. At the end of the hallway stood a tall metal door, painted in rusted red. The camera angle never changed. It was a fixed feed. I tried to switch the feed off as instructed, but there was no button to do so. My fingers hovered over the keyboard but nothing responded to input. At 11:47 p.m., I noticed something change. The lights in the corridor on Monitor 7 began to blink. First slowly, then with increasing speed. A high-pitched frequency began to hum through the control room. I checked the other monitors. Nothing had changed. Then at exactly 12 a.m., a figure appeared. He emerged from the right side of the hallway, as if stepping from the wall itself, dressed in a maintenance uniform that looked identical to the man who had driven the van. His face was obscured by shadow. Even though the hallway was well lit, he stood still for what felt like a full minute. Then he looked directly into the camera. Every monitor shut off at once. The room went black. The humming intensified. I reached for my phone, but there was no signal. I tried the intercom. Static. The emergency light above the door clicked on, casting a deep red glow across the room. I grabbed the binder and flipped to the back pages. A small card fell out. It had a phone number and a message. If he knocks, do not respond at 12:09 a.m. The knocking began. It was not on the control room door. It came from behind the wall where monitor 7 was mounted. 3 sharp knocks, then silence, then 3 more. I pressed my back to the far wall, my breathing shallow. I heard the doorknob rattle once, twice, then the door clicked open slightly. I had not unlocked it. I wanted to scream, but my throat was tight. A hand slipped through the crack in the door, pale, elongated, not human. The hand retreated as suddenly as it had appeared. The door eased shut with a soft click. The humming stopped. The lights returned. All monitors rebooted simultaneously. Monitor 7 was blank. The clock read 12:17 a.m. I called out Mara's name through the intercom. No response. I tried the emergency line printed in the binder. A male voice answered. Status code 351. I paused, unsure of what to say. Andrew McCullen. Security operative reporting incident on monitor 7. The line went dead-eye. Spent the next hour staring at the monitors. No movement, no changes. But the air felt different now. Like I was being watched, not through the cameras, but from the walls themselves. At 1:26 a.m. monitor 4 glitched. A frame of static followed by an image of the same corridor from monitor 7. But it was empty. Then it switched back. None of this made sense. I checked the binder again. Flipped to a blank section in the middle. My eyes widened. Text was appearing on the page in real time. You saw him, you heard. The knocks, you did not open the door. Very good, Andrew, you are learning. I dropped the binder. The words were still forming, but I could not bring myself to read further. At 2:15 a.m., a low hum returned. Not mechanical this time. Organic. Like a deep throat chant from somewhere far below the floor. Monitor 7 turned on again this time. The door at the end of the hallway was open. A dull light spilled from the open doorway at the end of the corridor. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, but it could not have been more than a few minutes. Nothing moved. The camera feed showed absolute stillness. Yet I felt like something was waiting just beyond the frame. Then the lights in my control room flickered. Once, then again. I held my breath. Monitor 3 showed a brief static flicker, before settling again. Nothing there. But then monitor 5 showed the same corridor as monitor 7. The same open red door. That should not have been possible. I stood up. The chair screeched behind me. The sound made me flinch. I had to see if I was losing my mind. I stepped to the windowless steel door and turned the latch. It was locked. I had not locked it. I reached for the intercom again. Nothing but static. The phone in the room began to ring. Not the emergency line. A different line. It was not in the binder. I picked it up. Hello, a voice replied. Not one I recognized. You opened the wrong monitor. I did not respond. Now he knows your name. Then the line disconnected. The monitors flashed. For a full second, all 10 screens showed the red hallway, except this time the lights were off. Then they returned to their original feeds. I could see my own reflection in the screen of monitor 2. I looked pale, not just tired, sick. I stepped away from the desk and sat on the floor. My heart was pounding. I counted the seconds, tried to regulate my breath. That was when the smell hit me. It was faint at first, like ozone. Then it became sharper, metallic, like hot copper and rotting fruit. I stood and looked around the room. No vents, no ducts, but the scent was growing. Monitor 6 blinked. It showed a new angle. This one from inside a storage room. At the edge of the frame, something shifted. A figure partially obscured by shelves. Not moving, not facing the camera. Then a voice came through the intercom. Route. Was Mara get out of that room right now? I ran to the door. It was no longer locked. The hallway outside the control room was colder than it had any right to be. My bear. arms prickled with goosebumps. The lights overhead were dimmer than I remembered, or maybe they were dimming in real time. I moved quickly without thinking about where I was going. My only thought was to get away from that room. As I turned a corner near Lab to be, the intercom crackled again. Mara's voice returned, but it sounded different now, slower, distorted like a tape that had been recorded over too many times. "Andrew, stay where you are." I stopped in my tracks. Her voice repeated the same phrase again, but out of sync. A full second behind the first. Then again, and again. 4 overlapping copies of the same sentence, layered over one another. My skin crawled. Then I heard footsteps. Not mine. Not overhead. Behind me. I turned slowly. The hallway was empty. The footsteps stopped. I backed against the wall and listened. I could hear faint mechanical whirs behind the drywall. Somewhere, a door creaked. Or maybe it was just the pipes. My breathing was shallow. I pressed the emergency call button on the wall panel. A different voice answered. Not maramail.com. Devoid of emotion. "You were told not to exit command. B, who is this? Return to the control room immediately. I am not going back in. There, you have compromised your status." The call cut. AFA. Loud click echoed down the corridor. A new door had opened. I turned to see one of the storage rooms ajar. A dull red light seeped from the crack. The same red as the door on monitor 7. My hand moved without my consent. I reached toward the handle. My fingertips brushed metal. It was warm. Then from inside the room, I heard my own voice whisper, "Andrew." The corridor beyond the hidden passage was impossibly narrow. The walls pulsed faintly with a sickly blue glow, as if veins beneath stone carried some unseen current. My footsteps made no sound on the polished floor, though I could feel the vibration of each step in my spine. I reached out to touch the wall. It was warm, alive. It throbbed beneath my palm like muscle. The passage twisted left, then dipped downward. I had lost track of direction. My phone was dead. No signals. No way back. Still I walked. Something about the silence demanded motion. If I stopped, I felt certain I would hear breathing not my own. Ahead, the glow intensified. The corridor widened into a chamber. In its center stood a chair, rusted iron, bolted to the floor. Above it, a single exposed bulb swung slightly, despite the still air. The floor around the chair was stained dark red, concentric rings radiating outward, like the aftermath of an explosion. A voice came from the speaker embedded in the ceiling. It was not Mara. It was not the man from before. It was a child. "You were not supposed to find this room." "Andrew." I stepped forward slowly, my shoes sticking slightly to the tacky floor. As I neared the chair, the bulb above flickered erratically. Then the light turned black. Not off. Black. It cast shadows upward instead of down. I looked at my hands. They were covered in soot or ash. I wiped them on my shirt, but it spread. The walls began to pulse faster. The chamber grew hotter. My vision swam. From the left corner of the room, something emerged. Not walking, not crawling, sliding. A shape like a man flayed open and inverted. Organs where skin should be. It had no eyes. Its mouth was a hole of chattering teeth, arranged in a spiral. I did not scream. There was no air to scream with. It raised one arm, pointed at the chair, and whispered in my voice. "Sit." I turned and ran. The corridor was gone. I slammed into concrete. The room had sealed. I spun in circles. No exits. No seams. The walls pulsed again, slower now, like a heartbeat in death. Then every screen on the far wall activated at once. Faces, not frozen now, moving, twisting, screaming. Some I recognized. The woman who had driven me once to a hospital, my 6th grade teacher, my father. Their eyes bled dark ink. Their mouths moved without sound in the center screen. My own face returned. I was smiling. The smile on the screen widened. Slowly, until it split the skin at the corners. Bloodless, mechanical. My reflection watched, me with still eyes, while everything behind it thrashed with life. I backed away, but there was no space left. The room had grown smaller, the walls closer, the ceiling lower. The light flickered like a pulse. I pressed myself to the far wall, searching with my hands for seams or switches. Nothing. The screen flickered again. My face disappeared. In its place was the hallway outside Control Room B. It was empty. Then, a figure appeared, thin, moving in jerks like a puppet with tangled strings. It paused outside the room and tilted its head. I recognized the suit it wore. It was mine. Then the lights went out. I dropped to the floor and covered my ears. The sound that came next was not a sound. It was a pressure, like grief pressing against bone, like regret made physical. My chest seized. I gasped. The air was gone again, in the dark. Something brushed against my shoulder. A whisper followed. "You left the door open, Andrew." Lights snapped back. The chamber was gone. I was in the hallway, back near Control Room B. The door was open, but the monitors inside were dark. I stumbled in, hands shaking. The chair I had used earlier was gone. The desk had deep gouges in it like something had tried to climb over. The binder lay open on the floor, the pages torn. Only one remained. My name was scrawled across it repeatedly in different inks, different hands, over and over. Like a chant, my voice returned without warning. Hoarse, barely mine. "What do you want from me?" The room replied through every speaker at once. "We want you to remember." Then silence. I stood in the center of the room, eyes on the ceiling. The intercom crackled one last time. "You are not Andrew anymore." The lights inside the control room dimmed again. Not a blackout, but as if someone were slowly pulling shadows down over the world. The temperature dropped. My breath fogged in front of me. The cameras flared briefly to life, each displaying a different part of the facility. But something was wrong. Every monitor showed the same figure standing still in the middle of each room. Identical posture. Same suit, same slashed smile. They turned, all at once, and stared at the camera. I reached for the power switch. My hand passed through it. There was no sensation, no resistance. My fingers moved through plastic and wire like smoke. I looked down. My hands were losing color. They were not fading. They were being rewritten. I stumbled back, knocking over the binder. The pages fluttered around me, each with a different name. Some were crossed out. Some were half erased. At the center of the room, where the chair had once been, a new figure stood, back turned to me. It slowly began to mimic my movements. I lifted my arm. So did it. I took a step. So did it. I circled around, desperate to see its face. It was mine, but older, worn. Its eyes were dull and hollow. Its lips moved constantly in a whisper. The sound did not match the words. "Help me then," it lunged. I slammed into the control panel, trying to escape. The screens burst into static. The speakers blared a frequency that felt like it would shatter bone. I dropped to my knees, covering my ears, blood rushing from my nose. The figure vanished. In its place, written in dripping black letters across the entire wall, were 5 words. "You broke the cycle, Andrew." Then silence returned. The only thing I could hear was my heartbeat, and the distant echo of weeping from my own throat. The sound of weeping deepened into something more animal. It no longer sounded human. I stood, dizzy, blood drying beneath my nose. The control room was darker than before, though the light had not changed. Shadows were thicker, hungrier. The intercom hissed again, static this time, then a sharp click. A recorded voice began to play. My own voice. "This is Andrew Carter. Night security shift. August 8th. Time is 12:13 a.m. I am alone." The recording looped, again and again. Each time it replayed, my voice grew less like mine, more mechanical. Then something changed. A whisper in the background. He is not supposed to know. I grabbed the intercom receiver and yanked the cable out. The voice kept playing. I stepped outside the room. The hallway was not the same. Longer, sloped downward. The overhead lights blinked like something was passing. Between them, I ran. The hallway seemed endless. Doors passed by in a blur. Some were open. Inside, flickering monitors showed different versions of the same night. Me arriving, me checking in, me walking halls that no longer existed. At the end of the corridor, I reached a door marked records. I shoved it open. Inside was a massive archive room. Rows and rows of shelves, tapes, files, screens. On the central table was a single folder, labeled Andrew Carter. I opened it. Inside were photos, dozens of them, each from a different year, each labeled with a date. My face in every one, same age, same expression, standing outside the same facility. Some of the photos were from the 1980s. Some even earlier. That cannot be me. But it was. I knew it was. Behind me, the lights shut off row by row. Something was in the archive with me. It whispered from the far shelves, "You were the first." Then it laughed, a dry metallic sound that turned my knees to water. I turned and ran again, back into the hall. But there was no door, just concrete, and then a new voice. This one was not from the speakers. It was inside my head. "Time to remember what you did." The voice inside my head did not speak in words, but in images. Flashes of memory that did not belong to me or had once and were buried. A child screaming inside a white room, a door sealed. From the outside, rows of workers with blank eyes performing tasks with perfect synchronicity. And then me, standing above it all, watching, recording, smiling. No, that could not be me. That was someone else. Someone I used to be. The hallway stretched again, now tilting steeply down into what looked like a service shaft. I climbed without choice. The gravity pulled me, or maybe something below did. As I descended, the world around me began to fracture. The walls flickered between concrete and a forest. Between metal and bone, I blinked. No change. My brain was failing to reconcile what was real. At the bottom, I emerged into a cathedral-like chamber. Machines hummed along the walls, connected by tubes and cables to the bodies lying on slabs of black stone. Each figure was covered in a thin film, like birth sacks. I stepped closer. Each face was mine. Some were younger, some older, some wore scars I had never earned. One had no eyes. One had no mouth. One opened its eyes as I watched and whispered a single word. Again, a spotlight clicked on behind me. In the center of the room, a figure waited. Not me, not quite. It wore my shape like a mask, but stood taller, bones too long, joints reversed. Its face flickered like a broken transmission. "You were not supposed to return, Andrew?" I asked, the only thing I could. "What am I?" The figure stepped forward, its movements liquid. Behind it, every other version of me began to rise from the slabs. They moved together, a chorus of silence. The figure answered without sound. "You were the prototype everything." Fractured again, the ceiling split open and revealed a vast void. Above, stars, circuits, screens, a mixture of heaven and machine. I was lifted into the air by unseen forces. All around me, moments of my life played out on invisible panels. But they were not my life. They were simulations, tests, trials. I had been run through this countless times, each version trying to fix what had gone wrong the time before. My voice cracked. "What did I do?" The sky machine responded. "You created us then." The stars fell inward. The chamber collapsed in reverse. I was pulled back through the shaft, through the hallways, through the control room, back into my chair in front of the monitors. Everything reset. The lights flickered on. The binder was closed. The cameras quiet. The intercom clicked once. "This is Andrew Carter. Night security shift. August 8th. Time is 12:13 a.m. I am alone, but I was not. Not anymore. The final screen in the far corner glowed to life. On it, another figure sat down in a control room identical to mine. Across his chest was a name badge. Andrew Carter. He turned to look directly at the camera and smiled.